think it's so interesting to understand what are we protecting ourselves from.
And Valeria, are there any roles within cyber that you want to highlight to our listeners? What is that role? What are the key skills needed, and what are the pros and cons of that particular position?
So, well, as for my experience, I've started on a more technical side of things. I actually take a lot of pride in saying that I started my career in just changing passwords, something very technical, very operational. But like now, after years of experience, I find that technical foundation really has helped me to see the strategical part of cybersecurity. Now that I am more in contact with the business side of it and business stakeholders, I'm able to bridge the gap between those operational side that I used to do the first years of my career, and now the more business ones that I get to see every day. But if I was to add something to my career just at the beginning, I would focus a lot on threat intelligence. I think it's so interesting to understand what are we protecting ourselves from. We focus so much on, trying to get the stronger infrastructure possible, limit our surface for attack. But what are we actually protecting ourselves from? What are the intentions behind the attackers? That is something I'm very, very fascinated by, and I try to read as much as I can on the topic, because it helps me a lot in my work and understanding risk scenarios.
Discover the future of cybersecurity, where Secure, CyberConnect and the International Cyber Expo join forces on Tuesday, the 30th September and Wednesday, the 1st of October at the Olympia, London. Join global experts, explore the latest tech, and connect with leaders from over 85 countries, all under one roof. Register for free, the link in our bio. This is the Secure CyberConnect podcast with Jay Adamson and Warren Atkinson, where we're joined by information, cybersecurity, technology and talent acquisition professionals who share their journeys, unique perspectives and offer advice and guidance. Our topics on this episode will be inside cybersecurity, career paths, inclusion and lessons from industry leaders. Today we're thrilled to be joined by both Beth, Rosary and Valeria Santamato. Beth is a technical program manager within tech and cyber, sitting very much at the intersection of technical and business. A non-linear route into the tech sector allows her to understand the many barriers that women and minority groups face when entering, and staying ahead in the industry by growing their careers successfully. As Head of Education at Women in Tech UK and founder of the future FoundHER's podcast, she bridges education, industry and community, shaping partnerships and amplifying women's stories to surface real-world insights. Valeria is a security consultant at Accenture, known for bridging the gap between technical and non-technical domains. Her experience spans both operational and strategic roles, from troubleshooting privileged access management infrastructure to embedding security by design into large IT solutions. She delivers security strategies that are both actionable and aligned with business goals. In 2022, she received the European Cyber Women Award for CEFCYS, which amplified her voice in advocating for gender inclusion within cybersecurity. And as an active member of the non-profit associations like CEFCYS and WAKE, she also contributes to education and international initiatives to promote diversity in the field. This includes her upcoming trip to Rwanda to lead workshops in schools and across companies that are encouraging women and girls to pursue careers in tech and cyber, as well as teaching university cybersecurity courses in France. Beth, Valeria, a warm welcome to the Secure CyberConnect podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Jay, for the introduction.
And Beth, as we kick things off, could you perhaps give us a high-level overview of some of the themes and topics that we're going to explore today?
Yeah, sure. So I'll probably share my kind of non-linear journey into tech industry and some of the barriers that I faced, as well as some of the passions that have kind of drawn from my career to some of the work that I'm doing with Women in Tech UK today.
No, that's great. And Valeria, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I will also be sharing my non-linear path into cybersecurity, as well as my experience in being an advocate for gender equality in the corporate world, as well as in the cyber ecosystem more at large. Very excited.
Yeah, it's a crucial conversation that myself and Jay are really excited about. And Beth, could you share with the audience something you're either proud of or excited about that isn't featured on your LinkedIn?
Yes. So I'd probably say my kind of confidence has kind of grown throughout my career. Probably not showcased as much on my LinkedIn. But over the last kind of year, I've kind of reflected, taken stock, and really invested in terms of where my passions lie, and what I want out of my career, and just kind of the steps within that in a short space of time have kind of been staggering. So yeah, it's probably what I'm most proud of.
Thank you for sharing. And yourself, Valeria?
As for me, it would be my passion for sports. I started playing tennis when I was a young kid, and I'm still very passionate about these sports. And I actually like to draw a lot of parallels between my professional life and the life of athletes. And being in sports has taught me so much, and a lot of it's now reflected in my work and the attitude that I bring to my workspace.
I appreciate you sharing. I'm sure tennis itself is a great way to find that balance and have that outlet when it comes to those stressful times. And on that, Beth, could you perhaps share a significant challenge that you faced in your career that's helped shape your views and perspective on cybersecurity?
Yeah, sure. So I think coming into the industry, I guess later on in my career, and through not through a linear path, I've probably been underestimated in certain rooms and maybe conversations. And I think I've really had to work hard in certain spaces, especially in the cyber industry, to earn respect, and kind of have that voice and be heard. And I guess what I've learned from it is, your perspective matters, your voice matters, and actually it can be really key to driving some decisions that might not have been thought about in that room that you weren't in before then. It's probably one of the key ones.
No, I appreciate you sharing, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And Valeria, is there a challenge that you faced in your career that's perhaps shaped your views and perspective on cybersecurity?
Yeah, actually, for me, it's quite different from that, because I joined cyber as a young female just after my studies. And I remember after my bachelor, which was actually not in a technical field, I started to ask myself quite a lot of questions about what I wanted to do. And I was working in IT during that time. And I realized that cyber could have been a field for me very interesting, not just because of its purpose, which is obviously to secure the world, and it's amazing as it is, but also because I decided to join cybersecurity right in the middle of Me Too and everything that shaped my idea, obviously feminism and a lot of values that are mine. And I saw that in cyber I could have a big impact, which obviously because it's a male-dominated industry. So I thought to myself that it was very brave. And now also looking back after 5 years of experience, I looked at that, that young girl that was a bit scared at the beginning of joining this industry. And I'm very proud of having taken that challenge and all the work that I've been doing since.
And just going into that a little bit more depth for both of you. Beth, this one's for you really. Could you talk us through a bit more about this non-linear path that you took into the tech sector, and along the way how those various experiences sort of shaped your mission to support women in the industry?
Yeah, sure. So my my pathway, I guess, is quite traditional in the school sense. So graduated high school, went to sixth form, went on to university. I studied event management, and then I wanted to travel, so I moved to New Zealand. And it wasn't until recently, actually, that I reflected, and my first job, I guess, outside of university was in tech. I was a receptionist for a search engine optimization company in Auckland. But I never put the two together in terms of you work in tech. I was very much in the box of I'm just the receptionist and I don't know anything technical. And I think that's kind of a reflection of how I went through my the shaping of how I thought about my career, from kind of education of what opportunities are out there. I'm not technical, I can't code, I definitely can't hack, I probably didn't even know what cyber was back then. And therefore that's a door that's closed to me. Whereas if I'd have had maybe, you know, a career talk or a role model or something in the education whilst I was through my education journey, I might have looked at that differently. And I think it's kind of what shaped me to kind of go into working for women in tech, and some of the work that I'm doing as well with podcasts, to really showcase that role model perspective of how you can get into the industry, and what that might look like for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for sharing. And Valeria, how did some of your earlier challenges, you know, you've touched on this a little already, but some of your earlier challenges influence your focus on cybersecurity and be an advocate for gender inclusion?
Well, I think, as I said, I decided to join cyber also because it was a male-dominated industry, and I joined in a time just before COVID, where there was a lot of talk and a lot of money was thrown at diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I was very, very excited as I started my career, because I thought I could do so much and I could change so much. And I think one of the biggest challenge was realizing that a lot of the initiatives are a bit short-sighted, in the sense that they don't have a long-term goal. And a lot of the beautiful LinkedIn messages, a lot of the beautiful hashtags, and a lot of the celebration that we might see on social media often doesn't reflect so much the culture of the companies. So that has been for me a biggest challenge, to wanted to bring about change in an industry that is not so ready to want to make that change. And right now that I have been working in the industry for quite a while, I'm kind of more aware of, you know, the difference between saying, I want to have an impact as a company and I want to change things, and what are the actual actions that you need to take in order to do that.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I think for both of you, you know, with Warren and I, we've seen a lot of talk over the recent years, D&I, everybody at events, HR, you know, representatives, everyone talks a really good game. But that systemic change is still not where it needs to be. And I don't know whether that's been a little bit because it's been a softer market. Maybe we're not seeing the growth in the tech and cyber sector that we've seen prior, but one can hope that when the markets do become more buoyant again, and that will undoubtedly happen as we head into next year and beyond, that people actually have lessons learned and implement what they've been talking about for a long time now. Both of you, really, I guess, and maybe Beth to take it first. You know, looking back, what key experiences or mentors helped you see the importance of representation and mentorship in tech and cyber?
Yeah, I guess for me, I didn't have too many role models or anyone that I emulated in terms of that represented me. But it was more, I had some really great mentors in the CEO, co-founder that I worked for in my first role into tech at a SaaS company. And it was really about kind of setting the expectation of, you know, you get what you put in, you know, not to be passive in your career and go and take what, you know, work hard and go and take what you want to go for your goals. And I think through that, as I've become more senior in my progression, I've seen, I'm a bit more of I'm the only woman in this call or this room, and I've seen kind of some of the decision making not coming to me in terms of, you know, seeing my perspective. But I think more recently we're seeing some incredible initiatives. So there's like the communities like Women in Tech UK. I've reached out to them. I've started my own kind of community. There's some really good stuff that's happening on social media outside of LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. You'll see the day in the life of, and you can actually see what it's really like to be. So you don't have to look at the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world to be like, that's a role model. you can look at your peers and those in your community around you for that kind of inspiration of, oh, that looks like a bit of me. I've got some transferable skills. I might give that a go. That's kind of my route.
I think to add to that as well, we mentioned social media platforms. LinkedIn's certainly the go-to space for those that are already in the field, but those that are looking to transition to, they are using things such as Instagram and TikTok. And to your point, showcasing those every day in my life, it makes it a reality for those people that haven't got LinkedIn. So ultimately, it makes it more inclusive and accessible. So I do commend you on that, and I do follow you and encourage our audience to follow you also.
And Valeria, if you'd be kind enough to share as well.
Yeah, actually, I think a lot about the role of representation and role models. And to go back to my first passion, that was like sports and tennis. I remember as a child looking up to these strong, competitive women on the field. And I kind of had the same moment when I joined as a cybersecurity consultant at Accenture. I had to pick a project to work on. And I remember just looking at one project when there was this amazing woman with great skills, big title, very outspoken. And I remember didn't even look into the project. I already know I wanted to join that one. So I think often we think that role models are not so impactful, but I would actually argue that they are. And you need to have a senior person that looks like you, or somebody that you want to look like, that you can kind of emulate. And for me personally, it has been so important at the beginning of my career to look up to these models. So
and I couldn't agree more. And going into one thing Warren and I talk about an awful lot, and we've had many discussions on the pod and outside the pod, is early engagement. We talk about early years cyber, really kind of looking at the syllabus, how it needs to be modernized and reflect the challenges. So in terms of outreach at school age, do we feel that, Beth, this one's for you really, why is outreach at school age really critical compared to university recruitment, for example?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Have you seen Educated in Yorkshire, the new series on Channel 4 that's just come out? So there's a clip for this.
I've not seen the new series. I've seen the some of the older ones, but I don't. Is there a new series out now?
There is. It's just come on. So there's the second episode due to come out or air this week. But it's about the trailer clips about teachers and how they deal with students on their phones with ChatGPT and AI. It's already here. The problem's already here in terms of tackling it on the ground level with students. But actually, when I've gone to go and do career talks around the northwest of England and spoken to educators, they've got it twofold, right? They've got students who are excelling in computer science. They love it. They want to definitely pursue that, girls and boys. But the educators haven't got enough resources, like up-to-date resources to kind of give them where they think, yeah, I trust that resource and, you should go and, extra homework if you want to go and do it, go and explore this or go and explore Y. And at Women in Tech UK, we've got some incredible courses and things on our website, but it's kind of putting the educator and these initiatives together. And the flip side as well is some of the risks that shows like Educated in Yorkshire are showing of, some of the downsides to things like AI, and how do we keep that curriculum updated and support educators in doing that. So I think there's twofold, but I've had, we're doing some work with Tech She Can, and they've been on the Future Founders podcast. And Becky Patel, the head of education, that initiative, through their research, they've shown that, children are twice more likely to consider a career in tech after just one school assembly on the topic. And then that goes up and up the more and more that engagement's there. So a bit like Valeria, you're saying around those role models, it really has to happen at that younger age so that children are engaged. And PwC did a research report this year They interviewed sixth form students and university students, and only 3% out of the 2,000 that they interviewed or did the survey with were 3% of females would consider a career in tech. And that's like later on in that area, a bit like what I was when I left university. And that's in 2025. So there's still a big gap and a way to go. And I think that early engagement is so crucial. And, you know, initiatives, we need to enhance, and how do we support educators to get there?
Yeah, surprising stats, to be fair, Beth. I'm shocked it's still only 3% at this point, really. I really am. And Valeria, from your side, what strategies have you seen that maybe have been effective in inspiring younger girls to see cybersecurity as a viable career?
Yeah, as for me, especially in my university engagement, when I talk to young girls, I get the feeling that they have a sense that cybersecurity is a solo experience. I get a sense that, you know, they get some course at school and they think that they're just going to be coding by themselves, or they're going to be fixing a firewall by themselves all day. And for me, what I communicate a lot about is that cybersecurity is a team sport. No one that I know in cybersecurity works day in, day out by themselves. They all, even the smartest person in the room, the one that we think that has all the certification and all the knowledge, they all need a team to share ideas, to confront ideas, because there is too much at stake when it comes to cybersecurity. So you need the knowledge from everyone. And I think when it comes to girls, it's very important to highlight this importance of community that we have in cyber that is not showcased so much. That if you decide to have your career in cybersecurity, you are going to be surrounded by people all the time, and it's totally normal to ask for help. And that community side, I think, and highlighting that to young girls has helped me showcasing what cybersecurity is really about, and to draw them in as much as they can.
And to both of you, maybe Beth, if you want to take the question first, in terms of parents, teachers, community, how can they all practically encourage that early tech engagement? What are some of the best approaches?
Yeah, I think I guess technology is all around, from iPads, phones, you know, social media. They're surrounded by it every day. But I think understanding kind of you know, how was this created, or do you know how, you know, this company works, or how technology is put together? I think asking some of those curious questions is really helpful. And I think parents and educators, they might have to, and sometimes they do have to. There's the hard line between black and white of, you know, no, you can't be involved with this, and, you know, it's bad for you, versus actually this is really good. You know, you're being curious, it's helping you, and you'll go on and do more. But I do think it's that the community you mentioned, not one parent, not one educator, not one initiative, not one company can do this by themselves. It's an everyday thing, and it's something that we all need to encourage and work together on and share that knowledge. So yeah.
And Valeria?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, Beth. And I also think that if I were a parent or a teacher, I already have, you know, a foot in the life of a young person, and I would try to really expose them to as many role models as possible, you know, because I think with technology we can put as many things out there, but I think as a kid, or as I remember being a kid, I wanted to actually see an image of somebody who looked like me, who did some very cool stuff. And I think we need to remind kids that cybersecurity is about doing cool stuff, is about, you know, fighting the bad guys and try to keep our world safe. And that is, for me, a message that it's quite easy to bring across, also even for a young person.
Appreciate you both sharing your views on that. And Valerio, why is diversity more than just a checkbox when it comes to cybersecurity, and how can organizations realistically measure this? Talking KPIs, metrics, culture, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I think that when I joined the corporate world in cybersecurity, as I said, I was a bit maybe disappointed would be the right word to see what the approach was just maybe to have a couple of initiatives here and there during the fiscal year and hope that some results will arrive. But the reality is that business know very well that if you don't put in place a smart, measurable goal, you're not going to be able to see results. So I think that in order to see the end of this tunnel that we are in, the people that work in gender inclusion in cybersecurity, we need to be a bit more courageous about the goals that we want to set. And we need to be talking in business terms to decision maker. Because if I was a business leader and I have, so many priorities, I need to focus on so many things, I would prioritize those that brings me the most money and the most business. And I know it might sound a bit of a capitalistic approach, but I think that we need to highlight how much more women in cybersecurity will make the business thrive. There has been many studies, such as one from McKinsey in 2020, that it's called Diversity Wins, that highlights that 1/4 of women in leadership roles brings about more than 25% increase in revenues. And I think this is some key figures that we need to talk about, and we need to communicate these figures to the stakeholders and the decision maker, so that they can take real commitment towards diversity and inclusion goals, and they can see it as well as an ethical and something that is good for our society, but also as a business enabler and a differentiator.
And do you think a good starting point is an organisation get an external partner in to help them with that? Should they be looking at their competitors, or should they be looking internally and assessing what capabilities they've got and what priorities are amongst their employees, for instance?
I don't think they necessarily need to look externally. I think they might have all the resource internally. I think they need to have an honest look at their culture, and they need to be more intentional about where they want to see change. For example, if you would like to have more women in position of power, I know that this sounds like quite a controversial word, but quotas might be a good way of solving the problem at the beginning, because we know at this point that women struggle to climb the ladder. We have tried all the trainings. We have been listening to all the conferences. That has not, unfortunately, led us to the results that we want. So I think there needs to be a bit of a more systemic approach, looking internally at what works in your organization and what doesn't.
That makes sense. And Beth, very briefly, are there any ways that organizations perhaps can measure the impact?
Yeah, I think Valeria's touched on a couple of points there. I think to take one of them further is around if you're going to measure that and change that culture, realistically, look at your retention rates, right? If women aren't being seen or they're not getting promoted, just like with anyone, it doesn't have to be a woman, right? They're going to leave. Look at exit interviews, start assessing that information. Let's start listening to what isn't working and what is working as part of that, not just a quota. Let's actually get underneath the skin of it and really assess what realistic change looks like day to day.
I appreciate you sharing. And Beth, what role does accountability play in retention, not just recruitment, for women in tech?
I think trust, they kind of, accountability and retention go hand in hand. If you haven't got trust, then, it's part of that culture piece again, right? Are you doing things that you're saying that you're going to do as part of your strategy in this area for diversity and inclusion? Are you actually measuring up to what you're saying you're doing? And can I see that day to day, in meetings, in decisions, in promotions? It doesn't have to be the big event at once a year of International Women's Day. It's not about that. It's the everyday decisions to make sure that women and minority groups are in the right rooms and at the right tables and are allowed to give their perspectives and their opinions as part of their skills. And I think that's part of the accountability and retention is that trust as part of that culture.
I appreciate that. And Valeria, how can organizations embed inclusion into their everyday culture rather than just treating it like a separate initiative? As Beth mentioned a minute ago, it isn't just once a year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Beth just said, because I think there needs to be a very clear definition of what a company is and what a company isn't. And I think that needs to be cleared up from the beginning of recruitment. So sometimes I see people like joining some organization and then they found out maybe 1 year later or 2 years later that there is a diversity and inclusion program in the company. So I think in order to really have that change in the culture, you need to be clear about your goals in diversity and inclusion, from the way you hire somebody, from the way you promote somebody, and from the way also you lead in a project. You need to foster that culture of, speaking up if something doesn't work. It's not like really fair and it doesn't follow what you have decided for your diversity and inclusion program to look like. So I think the more companies are brave about communicating what they are, and especially what they are not, and especially what they don't want to see in their company, the more the culture will become stronger, and also people will feel like they all belong to a culture that fosters diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I think having that shared purpose certainly resonates with teams, especially those ones that are more successful, because they're all pulling in the right direction, the same direction. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a business goal. As I mentioned, it could be something in terms of diversity goal. And Beth, is there anything further you want to add to that?
I really like your point, Valeria, on kind of the recruitment stage. I think there's really there's things that perhaps when you're looking for a new role that you should really consider as part of that organization, whether it's through one of the programs or not, understanding, what are my values and my goals, and what does it mean for me to work at this company? Whether I'm a woman, what am I looking for out of that? And I think there's some green flags that, you can definitely assess from an organization through kind of what it's doing in these kind of spaces.
Well, that's brilliant. And Valeria, are there any other barriers that newcomers face when entering cybersecurity, and how can they mitigate against these?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think there are different kind of barriers, some that are more like evident and more strong, and some that are more subtle. For example, I remember when I joined cybersecurity, because the domain is so large, I felt very overwhelmed with where I might stand. So I would say that's kind of like a strong barrier that might feel very intimidating, especially for young girls that are trying to join the industry. But then obviously there are also the most subtle ones, the kind of like of the unspoken rules. When you join a company, especially in cyber, there are some people that have been probably working on the same technology for a long time. And because you don't know that technology, you might feel like you don't fit in. And I think these subtle barriers might disencourage people to stay in cyber. And that, in my opinion, is one of the reasons why some people just tend to leave the industry after a while. And I think the most important thing to do here is to find your tribe. Find people that think like you, that wants to see you succeed. Hopefully there is somebody a bit more senior in that tribe that you can look up to and can kind of show you all the unspoken rules and all those subtle barriers and can help you navigate those.
No, that's brilliant. And Beth, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of those substitute barriers?
Yeah, I think that community piece is so key. I also think as well for newcomers, you're not only dealing with as Valeria said, the broader industry and quite how complex it is and new it is. You're actually dealing with yourself, and kind of that imposter syndrome can really creep in. Like you say, it can be really isolating. But actually, I think organisations could probably do more to support in terms of, that how do people learn, how do people approach in those industries. If you're new out of university, for example, and you're not that confident, like say go into those communities really helps.
Well, I appreciate you both sharing. And Valeria, how can senior professionals act as gate openers as opposed to gatekeepers?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I feel like there is a lot that senior people, or people that we think they made it, that had success, and now they have a big role and they're able to have a lot of impact. I think it's important to remind these people that they have a lot of responsibility in opening doors for the new generation that is coming. When I see sometimes these women, I feel a bit intimidated, and I feel like it would be hard to get in touch. Whereas the most eye-opening moments for me was when I actually approach certain people that have become senior and now make a lot of impact, and they kind of shared with me the unspoken rules I was actually talking about before. So the more the people that have leadership roles share those unspoken rules, the more those doors will open, and young people will not leave the industry.
No, I appreciate you sharing there, and I think it's something that Jay talks about quite a lot with people that he meets with, is the sharing of knowledge, opening those doors. And Beth, what misconceptions do young girls and young women have about tech roles, and how can we change the narrative?
Yeah, so I think the most common one is that you have to be technical to get into the industry. The only roles that are available in the box, so to speak, are coding, hacking. You have to know all of that stuff before you can even step foot. And it's just not true. And I was like that myself, kind of going into it. I don't play that role. I mentioned earlier that, I saw myself not in tech, even though my first role was in tech. There's so many different roles that women and young girls can go into, anyone can go into, like delivery, marketing, training, comms, HR. That is cyber, that is tech. Just because they're not technically in a specific field, an industry doesn't exist without those other areas and perspectives. So I think that's probably the main one.
I certainly agree with, and I think the revenue generating area of security is overlooked as well. You've got customer success, account management, sales. It doesn't have to be that someone's selling snake oil. Of course, it's being a salesperson who's a partner, and within that you can then pick up the technical know-how if you're spending time with the technical teams, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
How can underrepresented professionals manage the burden of advocacy without burning out, whilst of course affecting change?
Yeah, actually, that's something I think about a lot, because I think it's very important to define your scope and pick your battles from the beginning, because unfortunately, advocacy doesn't often pay the bills. And a lot of us who do this, we do it on top of our full-time job. And so it's very important to define the scope you want to have an impact on, and being able to select those opportunities that you want to act in, because otherwise you might risk saying yes to everything. And we all know that can bring, burnout or very difficult mentally situation. And I think also one of the acts that I've been experiencing over the year is that to bring that advocacy to my day-to-day role. I think it's fantastic to have conversation at work with colleagues about topics that are, for me, are very inspiring. And I get more inspired when I have conversation with them, because some of them might agree, some of them might not agree. And I think in both cases it's very just interesting to talk about it and to get more of a sense of why certain people think certain things and how us as advocates, we can adapt to have those conversations and try to draw in as many people as possible. And lastly, I think we need to remember why we do what we do. You know, I joined cybersecurity because it was a male-dominated industry and because I wanted to have an impact in this domain. And so once I remind myself why I started, that acts as a bit of a fuel, you know, and I try to make sure I don't run out of gas, let's say, because sometimes, you know, it can be a lot of tough days at work, and working on advocacy really needs to be fueled and really needs to come from a deeper sense of purpose.
Appreciate you sharing. And Beth, from your perspective, is there anything further you want to add to that?
I think Valeria summed that up perfectly, to be honest.
No, I certainly do as well. And look, Beth, if you could sort of restart your career tomorrow, and you were going back in time and tomorrow was tomorrow, what role within cybersecurity would you look to play? You know, what are the key skills for that role, and what would be the pros and cons of perhaps sitting in that position?
Yeah, I think I probably, I love what I do now in terms of change and delivery and kind of transformation. But I'd probably take it a step further in terms of operational. In cyber, I think there's some really interesting areas within businesses in the operations space. And I think kind of that resilience, the leadership, and kind of that protecting, you know, our core systems and making sure everyone's well-being is respected, I think.
No, I appreciate you sharing. And Valeria, are there any roles within cyber that you want to highlight to our listeners? You know, and what is that role? What are the key skills needed, and what are the pros and cons of that particular position?
So, well, as for my experience, I've started on a more technical side of things. I actually take a lot of pride in saying that I started my career in just changing passwords, you know, something very technical, very operational. But like now, after years of experience, I find that that technical foundation really has helped me to see the strategical part of cybersecurity. Now that I am more in contact with the business side of it and business stakeholders, I'm able to bridge the gap between those operational side that I used to do for the first years of my career, and now the more business ones that I get to see every day. But if I was to add something to my career just at the beginning, I would focus a lot on threat intelligence. I think it's so interesting to understand what are we protecting ourselves from. We focus so much on, you know, trying to get the stronger infrastructure possible, limit our surface for attack. But what are we actually protecting ourselves from? What are the intentions behind the attackers? That is something I'm very, very fascinated by, and I try to read as much as I can on the topic, because it helps me a lot in my work and understanding risk scenarios.
Well, I appreciate you sharing. And Jay, very briefly, are there any types of roles that you'd like to highlight for young women to potentially consider if they were looking to consider a role in cyber?
Well, I think there's going to be so much change in the sector with many of the GRC and SOC roles. I would tend to agree with Valeria in terms of the threat intelligence piece. I think that is definitely a key area and of course, anybody now getting into cyber, I think really needs to be well versed within AI. I think it's absolutely important. There's going to be a lot of upskilling, a lot of cross training. Companies are going to be, dare I say, downsizing some departments, but wanting different skill sets to complement the new tools that they're going to be investing many hundreds of thousands, dare I say, millions in over the coming years. So I think it's a really exciting time for the cyber sector, and especially for people coming into the cyber sector from academia, because I think there's going to be a huge amount of really exciting new tech. But without labouring the same old point, it's definitely going to be AI driven. So I think anybody really worth their salt now, certainly from the younger, not old buggers like me, you know, but people who can kind of like, you know, really come into the sector, I think really would be would benefit from having that AI skill for sure. And look, talking a little bit more about trends and things. I mean, one of the questions that I think is always interesting is different world now over the last 5 years. Hybrid, remote has taken a huge front and center within the sector, and I think we all have had fatigue with that. And most people now understand the importance of interacting, of having that team, of having a mentor, of having a day-to-day interaction. It sounded great at first, but 5 years on, we're in a different place. How do you think that affects, really, I guess, inclusion specifically? Because I think that is the biggest concern with hybrid and remote, I feel.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of benefits, I guess, with hybrid remote, making it's more flexible, etc. But making sure that when people aren't in quote unquote the room, the virtual room, that different perspectives are heard and that there's a balance. If there is mentoring, making sure that everyone's available for that and has an opportunity to get involved with it. I think it's the rooms that you're not in is kind of where that culture's born, and that's where I think the balance between hybrid remote versus in person can definitely still exist throughout all three. I just think there's a bit more work to be done in the hybrid and remote. I don't know, Valeria, if you've got any further points on that.
I actually think about this because I entered the workforce right before COVID. And so I was very impacted by remote work. And I also think that the office was conceived and thought for men. The office existed and was born before women entered the workforce. So I think today we still pay a little bit the price in that. And I think it's not adapted, for example, for pregnancies or for women who have chronic diseases such as endometriosis. So I think the fact of having the comfort of working from home for women especially, or any person who has, a chronic disease or any kind of physical issues, it's a huge privilege. But there might be some drawbacks as well in the fact that then there is people who still go to the office who are more visible than others. And obviously their personal branding keeps growing and their opportunities are shared at the coffee machine very often or at lunch. We know that. So we need to be careful with that hybrid culture and try to have a little bit more balance between giving the opportunities also to those who are working from home and not try to, gatekeep the opportunities only of the people who show up, who have the time and have the privilege sometimes to be physically there.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance, and one that undoubtedly we need to really work on going forward. Now, we've talked a little bit about tokenism. We mentioned it earlier with regards to the sector, and we feel that obviously I think that may have been covered a little bit. But how do you think meaningful inclusion can really replace tokenism? Beth, I'd go that with you on.
Yeah. Again, I know we did mention it earlier, but it's around that culture for me personally. I think if an organization's culture isn't actively working towards that daily, then it's just tokenism. You can't put say a woman in the position and say, look, this is what you're leading, and then there's nothing behind it to support that. It just doesn't exist, and that's what drives retention rates down, because you're pushing a message that isn't true. There's no support behind it.
Valeria, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just feel like it feels like you are invited to a party, but people are not actually talking to you. And so I think what's tokenism feels to me like, yes, sure, I've been hired, but are the opportunities being given to me? As a woman, I feel like sometimes I think a lot about this to explain why there is such a gap between, the amount of women where we try to hire and those to actually get to the position of power and leadership.
100%. And Beth, What's maybe one simple action that anyone who's listening to this podcast could maybe take right now to support women in tech?
Yeah, I think reflect perhaps on how has your influence so far supported or helped initiatives or individuals or women in the industry, or how could you do that in the next 3 to 6 months? And I think, simple things like, showing up on a daily basis, offering mentorship, seeing where the role models are, or advocating for change in your organization, or joining communities like Women in Tech UK. We've got a WhatsApp community, and it's very active, and you can join that and join the conversation and learn more about what some of the challenges are that we've spoken about today.
And Valeria?
Yeah, actually, I totally agree. I think that creates kind of a ripple effect. I have something that happened to me yesterday. I was talking into a meeting, and a guy keeps cutting my presentation, and he keeps going to the next slide. And there is someone in the meeting who said, "Please, can you let Valeria finish, because she hasn't finished her slide." And after that person said that, someone else contacted me and said, "Well, I think what happened wasn't fair." And so I think it really, when people start being more outspoken and, kind of saying when something is not right, it creates a ripple effect, and it makes more people talk about what's wrong. And then eventually things gets better, because the more we talk about it, the more we can stop those actions from happening in the first place.
Start the conversation. Now it's event season coming up. Obviously, we have a number of events pending, and International Cyber Expo is a key part of this. Beth, and I'll ask both of you this, why are events such as ICE so important, and who do you think should be attending these events?
Yeah, I guess first part of the question. So they act as like a leveler, right? You're putting so many different people into the room, so students, professionals, initiatives like Women in Tech UK, and bringing different conversations to the table, not just diversity, policy, AI that we've spoken about. There's loads of different things, and I think they're so important, because whether you're a student, whether you've been in the industry 20 years, you can learn something at these events, perhaps something that you didn't go to that, to the event aiming to learn or connecting with in terms of growing your network.
And Valeria, if you'd be so kind as to share as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, in-person conferences and events, just because as I said before, I work in cybersecurity. You can only work on a certain amount of topics, and it's really in conference that you get to see what's happening in the ecosystem. And for example, I saw that at ICE there is going to be a tabletop exercise, and there's going to be also some, really not just talks, but also display of events and things that happen in cybersecurity. I think we can all learn from that. And after coming from conference, I'm always super excited about the next one, because I get so much stimulation from meeting people that do completely different things that I didn't even know they existed. So for me, it's really one of the best things you can invest on, especially if you are at the beginning of your career, because you're going to discover so much.
And just drilling into that a little bit more, what are there any specific strategies that you think will help attendees, maybe people who are more inexperienced, maybe people who have neurodiversity, may get overstimulated at events? Are there any strategies that help attendees translate these conversations and sessions into, one, taking away from it as much as they can, but also into meaningful action within their teams or their communities thereafter? Beth, to you on that one, please.
Yeah, I think before you go with one intention or one action, aside from the talks that you're really passionate about. Whether it's to connect with someone or network with someone that you wouldn't necessarily speak to, and then take that back. I had a really good conversation with such and such, or I went to the Women in Tech panel and listened to the talk, and it was really interesting. And I spoke to X, Y, and Z. We should do more in this space, or like you said, start the ripple effect. Just have the conversation and see where it leads.
Valeria?
Yeah, definitely. Along the same line as Beth, I think one very simple action that people can do is also just share that they have been to the conference. I see sometimes a lot of people that are going to conference, but I didn't know they were there in the first place. So if you might attend the conference, maybe share that with your colleagues or write on LinkedIn, and other people might contact you, and you might get more out of the conference if you tell people you're going there.
And both of you are speaking at ICE. What insights or advice do you hope participants would take away about shaping the future of cyber and tech leadership?
I think if I want people to take something away, is to know that leadership is not a role. Leadership is not an amount of money that you're going to earn at a certain point in your career. Leadership is about serving others. If you get in a position of leadership, you will be very privileged. And in order to pay back that privilege, I think you need to understand that it's about helping others. And as we mentioned before, it's not about being a gatekeeper, but rather being a gate opener. And there is a lot of that in cybersecurity that we can improve, again, in order to bring and draw more diversity in and more people in. Because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is about making our society more safe, and we need everyone in order to do that. And leadership plays a huge role into it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'd say as well, we're in the industry now, and we get to help shape the future. We aren't the future, but we get to help shape that future through the conversations that we have, through the little everyday steps that we're taking, through podcasts like this, through passion projects that we are following. And I think that's what's exciting about it, and that's what you can help change is kind of that future. And what do you want to see in that future? AI is here, it's not going anywhere, but actually how can we support those that are stepping into the future roles that don't exist yet? And do we want them to be more equal? Do we want them to be, different perspectives in those positions? I know I do. So how do we help do that? And these conversations help that.
No, I appreciate you sharing. And Valeria, you're looking ahead to the future itself. What trends, innovations, and potential collaborations are you most excited about emerging in the industry?
I mean, I'll go with a very easy one. It will be AI. I think that could be that AI. There is a lot of overhyped about AI, and actually listened to one of your episodes about this topic, and there were so much interesting insights about AI in cyber and all the overhyped around it. But I think there could be a very good outcome, and especially for diversity, where AI might help us get some of our technical stuff automated. I would say things like, the amount of time cybersecurity analysts, especially at the beginning of the career, they spend on fixing the machines and doing a lot of, repetitive work. AI might help us kind of switch more from doing less repetitive jobs to spend more time together and actually being able to foster that culture of collaboration and diversity we talked about previously. So I'm super excited about AI entering the cyberspace, and I hope that some people might talk about the layoffs and AI cutting jobs. I hope that does not translate in women getting fired. We know that normally the more underrepresented community are the ones who suffer the more from the layoffs. So I really am optimistic about AI joining cyber, and I hope that the worst case scenario doesn't really happen, and the layoffs are not gonna affect the most vulnerable communities.
No, we echo that sentiment. And Beth, is there anything further you want to add to that in terms of predictions or innovations that you're perhaps excited about?
I think I emulate what Valeria's saying. I think for me, I'm looking at it from an education standpoint. It's something I'm really passionate about as part of my role at Women in Tech UK. And I think it's really an optimistic time. It's an exciting time. Yes, there are risks. Yes, there are changes coming, but we can really help be a part of that change and have a positive impact rather than only looking at some of the maybe downsides as well.
No, I appreciate you sharing. And look, as we come to the back end of the session, could each of you share a little bit more about your mission, vision, purpose? What are your next goals and priorities?
Sure. So at Women in Tech UK, our mission is to inspire 5 million women and girls by 2030. And we hope to do that through different initiatives, events, community, and really, and obviously podcasts like this. But it's really about securing that future. One of our pillars is education. And that's where we want to help shape that with those in industry like cyber, in tech, AI, so that we can really help make an impact.
As for me, it would be, today I work as a consultant in security by design. And I think I want to, my mission is really to bring something that I like to call inclusion by design. The same way I help my client making their IT product and their product more in general more secure by embedding security by design. I want to bring cybersecurity inclusion by design. I want to think about about inclusion, in the beginning of everything we do in order to not think about it as an afterthought. And ultimately, as for my next goals this year is to go more internationally. I will be obviously traveling to ICE in London, and I will be also traveling to Spain to MSP Global Conference. And towards the end of the year, I will travel to Africa, especially in Rwanda, to go talks in school there, try to bring cybersecurity also abroad and try to convince, in the end of the day, young girls to join this industry.
There's some exciting stuff ahead for both of you. And I speak for myself and Jay when we say thank you for your contributions to the industry itself. And Valeria, for our listeners who want to stay connected beyond Secure Cyber Connect podcast and community platform, how else can they reach out to you?
They can definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I will also share my email to you guys, and both those channels work very well.
Well, that's brilliant. And Beth, for our listeners and audience who want to stay connected with you beyond the community podcast itself, where else can they reach you and where else can they hear you?
Yeah, sure. So through Women in Tech, we've got a LinkedIn page, we're on Instagram, and we've got our WhatsApp community. You're more than welcome to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I'd welcome any conversations. And then through a Future Founders podcast, you can get that on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as Instagram and TikTok as well.
No, that's brilliant. And look forward to seeing both of you in the coming weeks in London.
Looking forward to that too.
We'd like to say a huge thank you to both of you, Beth, Valeria, to all the community and our listeners. We trust you'd have found a great deal of value in today's session. If you want to continue the discussion for more sustained engagement, as always, we invite you to join the Secure Cyber Connect community, where we offer solutions across tech, security, for all professionals at no cost. Expansive community access, mutual mentoring, online networking, and exclusive interviews such as this with inspiring individuals, as we've had on the episode today, along with panel discussions, masterclasses, and live events throughout 25 and beyond. Huge thank you to both of you, and take care, everybody.